Okay, here we go. You can all hear me? Can I get somebody to unmute and say, yes, you can hear me?
Yes.
All right, outstanding. Thank you. Okay, well, first page you already know. I'm Mr. Sellarole. This is 8th grade core. Of course, we learn English, language arts here, and U.S. history, right? You know that. Okay. So really when I teach my courses, I don't look at it as a day-to-day, a week-to-week, or even trimester to trimester. I look at my courses, English and history, as year-long processes. And ultimately, my goal is to help you all become better readers, thinkers, and writers. So if you're ever concerned about why we're doing anything that we do this year, really this is the ultimate focus. I've narrowed down everything we do down to these 3 major factors. We're going to become better readers, better thinkers, and better writers. Okay? It's a year-long process of building and scaffolding knowledge and acquiring new skills, honing current skills, and preparing for high school and beyond. I want you to focus on the skills and learning, not on the grades and the points. Okay? I know grades are important. I know grades are meaningful to us. I know that come high school, grades become really important because we want to get accepted into good colleges. But if all we focus on is how many points am I getting? How much is this worth? How come I got a B+ when I think I should have gotten an A-? Then we're not really focusing on learning a new skill or acquiring new knowledge. So I really want to try to help you shift your attention to, why am I here? I'm here to gain new skills and I'm here to learn. I'm not here to get a piece of paper that has a letter on it. Okay? A grade is just one letter of all the letters of the alphabet. If you get an A, if you get a B, if you get a C, that's supposed to tell you quite a bit of information. I want to make sure that you understand that what that letter represents is coming back to the idea of, did you focus on skills and learning? Because ultimately, for me, that's what your grade is going to represent. All right? Doesn't mean I'm not going to assign points. Of course I will. But if all you're focused on is, I got to get straight A's, I start to get worried that maybe you're not focusing on what you're learning. You're more focused on what your report card looks like. Okay? Again, as I said yesterday, it's certainly not impossible to get A's in my class, but an A represents excellence in these areas. You are becoming a better reader. You are becoming a better thinker. You are becoming a better writer. And that's my ultimate focus. Whether it's English or history, we'll be focusing on these things. All right, moving on. So first I'm going to go through our English language arts curriculum in general, and then I'll go over history as well. So in language arts, of course, we're talking about writing, we're talking about reading, and we're talking about vocabulary acquisition, building our word base. So for writing, there's a couple of categories here for us to consider. First, of course, would be response journals. I know a lot of you did journals in 7th grade. Maybe you didn't do too many in 7th grade. I'm sure you know my history of response journals. They are challenging. They are incredibly important. And I would say this, if my boss came to me and said, you can only teach one thing all year, it would be journals. This is how important it is. I know some of you, even though I can't see you right now, might be rolling your eyes, throwing your head back, feeling frustrated. Oh my gosh, I hate the sound of response journals. This is an incredible tool, an incredible vehicle to get you to where I need you to be at the end of the year, which is, of course, again, a better reader, writer, and thinker. These journals are an exceptional way for us to constantly maintain the practice and exercise of those 3 things. So when you hear response journal, don't think of it as it's an assignment. I want you to think of it as it is a process. It is a means to an end for you to get to the point at the end of the year where you are going to be really ready for high school. Okay? So don't look at it as a horrible thing. Look at it as an opportunity. There will be 10 journals throughout the year. They're already pre-scheduled, and in the coming week or 2, I'll be presenting all that information to you and when your due date will be. 1 journal turn-in. When you turn in a journal, it will be 5 paragraph entries. Each of those paragraphs is unrelated to the next. I know some of you had 7th grade teachers who perhaps had you do an entire essay as part of your journal. I don't do that. Essays will be separate. A journal itself will have 5 separate paragraphs, and each paragraph will be focused on something different. One will be based on a response to literature for a short story. One might be based on a response to literature to a poem. It might be based on a response to a nonfiction work. You will at times be asked to write unrelated to something you read, but perhaps something of your own experience or your own ideas, something expository or descriptive or narrative. Okay, I'll be getting into the details, of course, about journals in the coming weeks, but that'll give you a general idea there. Each time I sign them, all 10 of them are designed exactly the same way. 5 entries, 5 paragraphs. The focus of 8th grade really is about perfecting paragraphing. Yes, we will write essays, but we'll write a heck of a lot more separate paragraphs throughout the year than anything else. And if you can do that, you can craft any length essay. The focus, again, beyond response to literature, as I mentioned, persuasive, narrative, expository. I've probably left a few items out there, but that'll give you a general idea of the focus. Individual due dates will be assigned. Now, this class, I have 33 students. My other class, there are about 31 students. I will be collecting 3 to 4 journals each day over the course of 2 weeks. So your journal due date will be different than perhaps others in your class. And we will cycle through every several weeks in that as we get to the end of the year and do each journal. So some of you might be thinking, well, gosh, if I have to turn mine in first, that's not fair. Somebody else won't be turning theirs in for 2 weeks. True. But at the end of the year, when you turn in your last journal, some of your classmates will still be working on their last one for 2 weeks. So it'll all balance. It's always fair. I do need to say this, and I put it in bold print and a large capitalization there. Late journals are never accepted. All right, I'm going to say it again. If you feel the need to say it out loud at home, say it. Late journals are never accepted. Okay? Even if you're sick, you're on vacation, you know, there might be some really extenuating circumstances where you and I make a deal about why it's late, but there's really no reason, because you'll have at minimum 3 weeks between each journal due date. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to complete it in 1 week, quite honestly. I don't want you to rush it. I know some of you like to save it to the last day and try to do it all the night before. Those journals usually turn out getting pretty poor grades. I'm not going to lie to you. I can tell the difference between planned writing and rushed writing. I've been doing this job for quite a while. I'm really good at reading student work. You can't fool me. So there's really so much opportunity for you to complete a journal and complete it well and edit it and proofread it and make it perfect as it can be, that there's no reason for me to accept late journals. And here's the other thing, as I mentioned, I have over 60 students this year. If I start accepting them late, then the workload becomes a burden upon me, and I can't let them stack up that way. All right, so I'm just going to say it one more time, and I want you to say it with me. Late journals are never accepted. Now, that is going to be a really important factor when I go through how much these are worth in your grades. That's going to be part of my presentation here in a moment. I'm going to talk about the weight of each grade category, and journals are quite heavy, so you don't want to let those go. All right, moving on. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to write them down and send them to me afterward. Continuing with writing, of course, there will be essays. In particular, the types of essays we're going to be writing are going to be comparing literature. We're going to be doing character analysis. You'll be doing a bit of research. There will be at least one big essay, one major essay. When I say big, 5 paragraphs, certainly no larger than a 5-paragraph essay. When I say big, I mean heavily weighted, 100 points, big category. At least one per trimester, perhaps more. Now, because I'm talking about language arts right now and not history, I don't want to confuse you, but I will say that there will be some essays in history as well, in particular DBQ essays, and I'll talk about those in a moment. But again, paragraphing will be far more your focus than essay writing, but there will be essays, okay? You'll have 2-point assessments, which are timed paragraph writings. During first trimester and during distance learning, probably fewer than typical, and I probably won't start doing 2-point assessments for several weeks, because I want to make sure you get the instruction you need before we get into that. Now, an assessment essentially means test, right? So I will, from time to time, be testing your writing abilities, your paragraph writing abilities. It's a 2-point assessment. A 2 means you did precisely what you were asked to do. You knew how to structure the paragraph, you answered the question or the prompt correctly, or at least I shouldn't say correctly because there are no real right answers, but rather you addressed the question or the prompt directly. A 2-point would mean you use good word choice. Your sentence structure was varied and was powerful. A 2 out of 2, of course, would be 100%. Now let's understand something. Getting a 1, writing a short, nondescript paragraph may have followed some of the directions, but not all. And perhaps that equates to a 1 out of 2. Well, you know how to do the simple math. A 1 out of 2 is 50%. So this is kind of a pass-fail type assessment. And again, these are going to go into a category of your grades that are going to be pretty heavily weighted. Okay, so you can't look at these as, no big deal. They will have an impact. Okay, those will come again probably about mid-trimester before we need to start doing those. But keep that in the back of your mind. Again, if you have questions about them, let me know. Please know this, when they happen, when I give you a 2-point assessment, I'll let you know ahead of time it's coming. I'll make sure it's a topic I know you can handle, and I'll make sure the instructions are very clear as to what's expected of you in order to get a 2. Okay? There will also be various other projects as we assign in writing, some small things, sometimes gather into a group and produce information that we're going to share. You know, as your typical classes go throughout your years of education, there'll be lots of little projects and other assignments that we will do. But that kind of encompasses most of the writing. Really, the bulk of it's going to be your journals, as you know. All right, moving on. Language arts, of course, also includes reading. And I'm going to go over in a moment, in particular, the novels, because the novels are really the vehicles that take us through the year and set the stage for all the learning we're going to do with regards to what those novels have to offer us. But the reading throughout the year, there are going to be 4 novels, really 3 novels and a play, a drama. We will be reading a handful of short stories. There will be a short story to read in every journal. That means that there's 10 right there, plus a handful of others. So I'll go out on a limb here and say there's probably about 15 short stories to be read this year, along with the 4 novels. There'll be a poem in almost all of the journals. So I'd say about 8 or 10 poems throughout the year that you will be reading and analyzing and writing about. And of course, a variety of nonfiction. Nonfiction typically will be based in history. So for example, the Declaration of Independence is going to be something you're going to read for a journal entry. Well, that's indeed a nonfiction document. Of course, your history textbook will be something that you're going to be reading along with primary source documents. And those primary source documents will typically be a part of your DBQs, the document-based questions. If you're not familiar with a primary source document, it's a historical document that is from somebody who observed, who lived, who was there to witness the history at hand. If we read a letter written by George Washington and we're talking about his first year as president, that's a primary source document, right from the horse's mouth, right from, well, not his horse. By the way, his horse's name was Nelson. I always find that an amusing fact about George Washington. But if it came straight from George Washington, then we know, and it's about him, that's primary source. Or if it was, an observation of somebody who watched somebody speak and it comes directly from that moment in history, primary source. There'll be quite a few of those as we go through the year. We will also from time to time practice what we call close reading. Close reading is a process of reading, questioning, annotating, and possibly responding. Typically, when we close read something, we read it more than once. For example, your first journal is going to open with a poem. We're going to read that poem. We're going to talk a little bit about that poem and analyze it and question it. We're going to read it again. We're going to note words we didn't know. We're going to read it again. We're going to make some notes and make sure we fully understand what it is we're getting into here. All right. Now, will I have you read a novel more than once? Not necessarily, but you might go back and read some sections of it more than once and write down some notes and some questions, all right? Learning to be a good note taker is going to be part of becoming a good reader, okay? So I'm not going to try to overwhelm you with voluminous pages of reading every night. Rather, I want you to be able to consume smaller chunks of reading so that you have the opportunity to go through it more than once. I'm sure we've all read something before and thought, gosh, I just read that and I have no idea what I just read. It's easy for our minds to get distracted while we're doing something else. This is why this is an important skill, all right? And again, skill. We are chasing after skills. We are chasing after knowledge here. We are not chasing after points and grades. If you chase the skill, if you chase the learning, the grade's going to follow you. All right, moving on. Okay, so I mentioned we were going to go over the novels in a bit more detail here. And so starting with Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This is the first novel we're going to be reading, and we're going to be starting this in a couple of weeks. The focus of our learning with this novel is going to be on plot structure. So we will be building a plot model based on this novel. And this novel follows a pretty basic plot structure. So, and I know some of you may already know about some things about plot, but this is a good foundational place. I'd like to make sure as we read literature, it's not just about getting something out of the story, but also understanding how literature is structured. Literature has a purpose. Literature is a means of understanding our culture and how we choose to live our lives and things that perhaps we think should be important, the ideas and messages we want to get out to the world. And there's a lot of great stuff in the novels that we're going to be reading that are going to help promote those feelings, those sentiments. But also, I want to make sure you understand that literature has some very distinct structures. And so we're going to make sure we understand how literature is built. It's going to help you understand the things you read much more easily as we go through the year. So plot structure will be a focus. We'll also focus a lot on symbolism. Authors always put things into their stories, into their novels, into their poems. They put them there on purpose. Why did the character wear a red sweater? Perhaps that red was purposeful and the author wanted us to pick up on something. Why did this character do that? There must be some meaning behind that. So we'll talk a lot about the symbols that authors place in their literature, and you'll be writing about that as well. When we're done reading Fahrenheit, we'll be reading 3 short stories by the same author, Ray Bradbury, which are very similar in theme to this novel. And that'll be the essay you'll be writing first trimester, in which you'll be writing a comparative writing to the novel and the short stories. Really, we'll be looking at thematically, what was this author trying to share with us? What's the message? What is what was his, if you were, his thesis statement about the world? All right. One of my favorite books, by the way, and one of my favorite authors. So I'm a little biased, and I'll tell you that I absolutely adore Ray Bradbury and his work, and I hope you will too. The next book we read is Ender's Game. I know this is a popular book, and a lot of you perhaps have already read it, or you've read some of the others in the series. There's, gosh, I think 8 books in the Ender's collection. They're not all necessarily chronological, but they're all really quite fascinating. The focus of Ender's Game is going to be something called the hero's journey. If you're familiar with Bruce Campbell and his theory on the hero's journey, and he did a lot of research in religion, and what he essentially found was that throughout hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years of civilization on Earth, how one culture told a story turns out to be almost identical, if not very similar, to how another culture somewhere else in the world also structured and told their stories. The hero's journey is universal. So we're going to look at this hero known as Ender and see how his journey lays out. We'll be plotting out all these steps that a hero typically takes. Again, this has everything to do with understanding how literature is structured, okay? And once you understand this hero's journey, you're going to start to see every hero and every story in almost the same way. It's fascinating. We'll focus on characterization. Again, a hero indeed is a character, but we'll also break down our character into parts so we understand his actions and his reasons, etc. So there's a lot of good information to extract from this story with regards to character. And again, there'll be a short story. This novel actually was a short story before it became a novel. When we're reading the novel, we're also going to read the short story, and we're going to write a comparison. A short story can't have every step of a hero's journey, but we still enjoy short stories. How is it possible when there's parts missing that we can still find it entertaining? That's something we'll be looking at. We'll be reading Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice after that. This is the play, the drama I had mentioned. Of course, we'll be focusing on dramatic structure, certainly different from literary structure. We will be focusing on audience in the sense that if Shakespeare understood what his audience wanted, then he had to write a play that would entertain them. So we'll talk a bit about and work on the idea of how do writers connect with those who are going to be reading their material. That is your audience. We'll be talking about protagonists and antagonists, heroes and anti-heroes. This story is quite fascinating because whom we might assume is supposed to be the hero is not to the characters in the story. This is a 500-year-old story. So who Shakespeare saw as a villain then, certainly somebody we might not see as a villain now. In fact, we might think the heroes of the story would be today's villains in our stories. So it's a really interesting read. One of my favorite Shakespearean plays. I've read a lot of them, and this one still comes out on top. I think there's lots of great lessons to be learned here. Of course, we'll also, and I know summary is something that you probably mastered in about the 5th grade, but summarizing Shakespeare's work can be very challenging. So we will focus on the summation of complex text. Of course, Shakespeare's work is, well, Old English and therefore complex. Lastly, we'll be reading The Martian by Andy Weir. Some of you may have read this already, or perhaps you've seen the movie with Matt Damon. As you can see in the image there at the top, it says Classroom Edition. Some of you maybe read this novel and you're saying out loud, wait a minute, that guy drops all kinds of horrible language in this story. Yes, he does. Fortunately for us, we have the Classroom Edition, which has, of course, edited out all of the colorful language, at least most of it. The purpose of reading this one, other than the fact that it is kind of just a fun read, it's cross-curricular. We're going to be looking at the mathematics, the science, the civics, the history, to see how this character engages in problem solution, constantly problem solving for his own survival. This is going to accompany a major group project we'll do in 3rd trimester. And this group project will be all focused on the idea that you've got a major problem to solve. So we're really going to use this book less about connecting to literature and more about connecting to other things we learn in other classes and how we can apply them to one major project. So at the end of the year, you will be presenting as a group to me some kind of major problem solution in a big displayed presentation. It's actually a lot of fun. And again, we're going to be in the classroom to do this, right? Not distance learning. And that's going to be a really cool thing that we get to spend a lot of time on in 3rd trimester. All right, moving on. I mentioned vocabulary acquisition as the 3rd part here to what we're doing in language arts. To put it simply, Latin and Greek roots, which I believe I mentioned yesterday. You'll learn 124 roots. There are 24 weekly units. We will be starting those, I believe, the week after next. It might be next week. Let me put it to you this way, and I think I mentioned this already. If you learn 100 root words, the foundation of a word, English was not developed as a language itself, but rather was borrowed from a great many other languages, but in particular Latin and Greek. If you can learn 100 of those roots, your vocabulary opens to 3,000 new words in English. So let me put it to you this way. We could cover 3,000 new words this year, or we could cover 100 roots. Sounds a lot better when you say it that way, doesn't it? So this will be a part of expanding your vocabulary. You're going to use these roots in your writing, and you'll be required to show them in your journal writing, for example. There will also be a test each week of these 24 units. It starts pretty easy. It tends to get challenging as we go if you don't maintain flashcards and things like that. So as these come, make sure you are maintaining these week after week. Each test will include information from a previous week. There will be 30 items on a test, and it'll certainly be that week's set of roots, but it also may include a scattering of any other roots we've learned previously. So don't look at these Latin and Greek roots tests as a week-by-week thing. It is building and scaffolding throughout the year, so you're constantly in review of all the roots throughout the year. All right? So I'll talk about your supply list and flashcards, and this is one of the reasons you'll need it. As we read each novel, there will be a vocabulary list that goes with it, and those are already pre-made. And so when we start reading our first novel, I will submit to you the vocabulary list among other questions you'll be answering as we read the novels. So this will be part of our vocabulary acquisition. All right, moving on to our history class. We will be studying, of course, United States history, starting in the late colonial era to the turn of the 20th century. So we'll be starting at the time when just before America became America and the Revolutionary War. Actually going a little further back to the French and Indian War. And we'll be finishing up the year at the time of mass migration into the United States in the late 1800s, early 1900s. We'll be talking about the industrialization, the Industrial Revolution, basically the rise of machinery as opposed to human labor. With that came a lot of problems. And so we'll be talking about a lot of the politics involved then that helped shape and reform America in some ways. For example, tomorrow and the next day, you have off. It's Saturday and Sunday, right? such things like a weekend were things that were argued for and won at a time of this history. So just to give you a little sort of snapshot of what we'll be looking at. It's not a long period of time, but it is a massive period of change in America. All right, so you have your History Life textbook, which you should have picked up already. We're not going to do this chapter 1 to chapter none. I won't cover every chapter in the book. When I do cover chapters, they will go in order. But for example, we'll be starting with chapter 3. A lot of it is information you covered when you were in the 5th grade. So there will be some things I skip, but there's also a lot of things I will do that address information in the book, but I'll address it in a different way. So there'll be other things to be reading and other activities to be done. There'll be small projects, other assignments. And let me move on here. Document-based questions, I mentioned, the DBQs. Sometimes there'll be protracted assignments. Maybe we'll just go through a few of the documents and just answer questions. Sometimes we'll just create outlines, but not turn them into full essays. But by trimesters 2 and 3, we will certainly be writing full 5-paragraph essays based on any particular of the DBQ packets. I don't want to get into too much detail about DBQs if you don't know what they are yet. You can go online and check them out. You can talk to your older siblings who are in high school. You will do DBQs in high school, and so I will help prepare you for that. Now, the picture there on the right says high school. I don't mean to make you panic. I have a combination of high school and junior high school document-based assessments. I'm not going to give you anything you can't handle, okay? So that was just really a good picture for me to include in my slideshow. Some of the DBQs I have are the high school level, but I've made sure they're the ones that are more than manageable for you. So don't let that send you into a panic. History also is going to include lecture notes. I will be going through for example, you've got the picture here of George Washington crossing the Delaware. That's an image we'll be looking at, and I will have a section of lecture notes that you will be following along and filling in information as well. Again, not getting into too many details about that, but just know there will be notes that you will be taking at various times through our history units. There's some videos to be watched, annotations, lots of notes, small projects, again, other activities. Please note at the bottom there in yellow, most exams are open note. So when we do a big history unit, for example, on the American Revolution, we will do all of these things. There'll be lectures, there'll be videos, there'll be little activities and whatnot, and some work in the textbook. And when it comes time for the big test, all that information is allowable to have open during the test itself. Okay. Now, I know what you're thinking because you've probably heard of the Constitution exam. The Constitution exam is not an open note exam, but don't worry, you'll be fully prepared for it. But there are 4 or 5 exams in history throughout the year that will be open note. Speaking of the Constitution exam, the U.S. Constitution exam is worth 50% of your trimester 1 history grade. All right, so everything we do in history up until the end of the trimester will only be worth half the course grade. The other half is going to be weighted on the Constitution exam. I realize this year you're going to have to take the Constitution exam at home. I am going to create whatever accommodations I see necessary to make sure that you can do it with some integrity. And of course, I don't want anybody cheating, but as I said, it's not an open note test. So probably have to do some communicating with families to make sure that we can take this and do it well. But I'm confident. My students always do really quite well on this exam. So I don't want you to worry too much. But the Constitution is important, not just because you live in America and perhaps you're an American citizen and you need to know the foundation of our government and our law. I mean, that is ultimately what's important here. But it is also the foundation of everything we're going to learn in history beyond the writing and ratification of the Constitution. Everything that happens here on out lays in the foundation of being a nation of laws, not a nation of men. And so this document is where it all starts. And so we will talk about constitutionality as we go through the year and understand how and why certain things happened in history. So it is the place that we really need to start. And that's why it's weighted so heavily and why it's so important. It's critical for us to know. And honestly, you will know more about the Constitution than I think a lot of members of our own Congress. And that sounds like a joke, but I'm being serious. I do worry that some of our lawmakers don't quite fully understand this document. as an 8th grader, you're going to know a lot about it. And I think you're going to be more educated than a lot of Americans will on this. So I pride myself on doing a good job. And I want to make sure this is the one thing I can really pass on to all of you. Okay, homework, or what we might call asynchronous time. And by the way, I'm watching the clock and I realize I have about 2 minutes. So I'm going to try to go quickly here. Journals will primarily be done at home. Beyond that, and that's kind of your homework. That's going to be the bulk of your work outside of class time. Other assignments, editing, proofreading an essay, doing some studying, that's typical out of class stuff, all right? Make sure you use Google Classroom. Make sure you check the calendar. I highly recommend a planner or an agenda. Something handwritten, quite honestly, I think is best. If you work digitally and that works for you, great. I'm a big fan of putting things on paper because it just works for me better, and I just think that's a better way of going. As far as grading, as I mentioned, grades will be weighted by category. A late assignment, less than 50 points, will receive half credit. Projects, essays, anything else that's worth more than 50 points will lose 10% each day, but it won't get reduced beyond 50%, all right? I don't believe in giving a 0 for work that's done, but you might only get half credit, but half is better than none. Any assignments that are missing will be marked with a 0 in the grade book. So if you see a 0, it means you didn't do it. All right, I don't give zeros for things I collect. If you put your name on a paper, I'll at least give you 1 point. So a 0 means it's absolutely missing. If it's missing, it's up to you to talk to me about it. If it's makeup work, if it's a makeup test, your job to communicate with me about making that up. I will not chase you down to find your missing work. That's your responsibility. Here are the grade category weights for language arts. As I said, journals are really important, so 35% of your grade. Essays and projects and those 2-point assessments, 30%. Any test, exams, etc., 25%. And your participation daily and distance learning and any little classwork assignments will be 10%. Yes, your daily participation, your attendance will be part of your grade. That's for English. First trimester history, as I mentioned, constitutional exam is half. All other things will include the other half, exams, tests, DBQs, your participation. You can see how that changes in second and third trimester with exams, tests, quizzes, DBQs and exams, and your participation. When you turn things in digitally, make sure you are using a size 12 or 14 type. You're using Calibri or Arial or Helvetica, some kind of professional font. I don't want to read your typed work looking like a child wrote it in crayon or some of those fun swirly fonts or whatever. Keep it looking professional. Keep it looking like you would read in an article on the news or something. Double spaced, please. And of course, we'll turn almost everything in through Google Classroom using a Google Doc. I'll let you review the supply list. Ultimately, you just need a computer, of course, but pens and pencils and paper is important because I think things can be done with you'll encourage greater memory if you do things by hand. Make sure you have at least 3 different colored highlighters, and I'll go over the reasons why when we get to studying for our history exams. Flashcards, you'll need 200 plus for the Constitution. You'll need at least 125 for Latin and Greek roots. And again, have a planner or an agenda of some kind. Lastly, if you need to communicate with me, there's my email address. I know you all know how to connect to that. There's also the phone number for the office at Olympus. If you ever need to contact me that way, they'll let me know that you called. All right, I'm going to stop sharing here. Okay, am I back here? Are we live? Thumbs up. You hear me good? Okay, it's 8:40 right now. So that means this class is over and you actually need to go join your third period, right? If you have any questions about what we just covered, I want you to send me an email, all right? Don't put it in the chat here because I'm gonna have to close this down, but send me an email if you have questions. Have a great weekend. I'll see you. Take care.